Once upon a time, in the busy city of Lagos, there lived a man who wore fake lashes on the streets. His name was Kelechi, and before all this happened, people respected him to a fault. Kelechi was the kind of man who people greeted with two hands. However, everything changed one morning when the people saw him on lashes on the street. His wife Adama stood next to him like a soldier, as if soaking in the humiliation that now surrounded her husband. Everyone could tell that Kelechi was forced to appear in public in lashes, but what people could not understand was why a woman would do such a thing to her own husband. Some assumed that Kelechi could have cheated on his wife to make her humiliate him in such a way, whilst others believed that his wife Adama had locked him in a bottle with her evil charm. Can't you see the way that he's walking? Like a man whose senses have been locked away? They said as they shook their heads in pity and called him a finished man. No one cared to ask, as they all concluded within themselves that Kelechi married a very wicked woman. From that day on, the lashes did not disappear from his eyes. Everywhere Kelechi went, the lashes went with him. To the supermarket, to the church, to family gatherings, even to a friend's wedding. Each time, Adama stood beside him, her back straight and her eyes cold. Kelechi never for once tried to take off the lashes. He wore it like a crown, and no matter how people stared, he ignored their stares and walked with his wife like an obedient servant. Months passed, and the respect people once had for him began to fade away like smoke. People no longer greeted him with two hands. Some avoided him completely, whilst others laughed openly as they pointed at him on the streets, calling him a handsome baddie. Men whispered behind his back, whilst women shook their heads in pity as they cursed his wife for bringing shame upon her husband. Even Kelechi began to resent his wife. At home, he stopped talking to her. He slept in a different room as his heart grew bitter like a weed. Kelechi wished he could leave. He wished she would just disappear out of the face of the earth, and his wife Adama did not even care. Instead, she looked for more ways to make his life a living hell. Adama made her husband carry her handbag in public. Even when people stared and laughed, she ignored their stares as if what she was doing was normal. One evening, a strange woman approached Adama to ask why she treated her husband in such a wicked way. Don't you know that he's a man? Why would you allow him to walk around in lashes? Is he a woman, or is something wrong that we don't know? She asked Adama, who advised the woman to mind her business. Adama stood there and watched as the woman told her husband that it's not by force to remain married. People around slowed down. Some stopped walking, whilst others pretended to check their phones as they listened to what was happening. Adama turned slowly to look at the woman, her face calm and unreadable. Kelechi stood beside her, lashes still on his eyes, his head lowered in shame as the woman looked at him with pity as she began to yell angrily at Adama. You should be ashamed of yourself. You have turned your husband into a laughingstock. Is this how you treat the man that you vow to love? People nodded in agreement as they began to murmur. Yes, so this Adama is wicked though. This is just too much, they said as the woman turned to Kelechi again. My brother, man up, oh. Leave this woman now. A man like you should not be suffering like this. You still have your dignity. Walk away. Kelechi's heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment he imagined leaving, damning every consequence and walking away from her. A life where he has the opportunity to be his best self. So he swallowed hard and raised his head slowly. Everyone waited for him to speak as he looked at the woman and shook his head. No, he said quietly as the woman frowned in shock. You mean to tell me that you won't leave this woman? She asked Kelechi, who nodded his head and revealed that he can't leave. I can't leave her, he said as a wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. Is this man okay? This must really be juju, the people said as Kelechi informed the woman that he still loved his wife. I know I resent her so much because of all that she's doing. My heart is indeed heavy, but what I can never ignore is my love for her, he said to the woman, who stood there shocked to hear such a thing from him. Even Adama's eyes flickered for a second as she watched her husband profess his love for her in front of the whole crowd. Adama could not take it anymore. She returned home angry as she met her husband's friend, Anayo, who was so shocked to see his friend on lashes. Guy, is everything okay with you? He asked Kelechi, whose heart broke to see the look on his friend's face. However, Kelechi assured his friend that he was fine. In fact, he told his friend that his wife was the best thing to have happened to him. Anayo could not believe his ears. He left their house that evening, convinced that his friend was now under a charm. Kelechi, despite all that his wife had done to him, still treated her like a queen. He cooked for her, washed her clothes, and even cleaned the house without complaint. Kelechi saw past her attitude as he showered her with so much love, despite all that she did to him. He believed strongly that one day things would return back to normal and the wife that he once knew would surface again for him to love. What he did not know was that Adama was about to cross a line that finally broke something inside of him. One evening, she returned home late with another man, a handsome-looking man who was tall, confident, and rich. Her husband Kelechi was sitting in the living room when the house door opened. To his total dismay, he saw his wife strolling into the house with another man. Kelechi looked up and froze as the man walked past him like he did not exist. Adama did not even explain. She did not apologize. She did not even look at her husband. Instead, she led the man straight into their bedroom as she shut the door behind them. Kelechi sat there frozen as their laughter filled the entire house, his heart breaking in a way that he could not explain. In that instant, he remembered how happy they once were as a couple, how his wife would stay up late and wait for him to return from work so that they could both eat together as a couple. Kelechi remembered how she fought her uncles, all because they refused her from marrying him. Adama loved him to a fault, and Kelechi could not understand her sudden switch. For months, he had tried to speak to her on several occasions to know what he could have done wrong, but Adama was not willing to speak about it. In fact, she told him that she was done with the marriage, but Kelechi could not stand to see them apart. He loved her so much and asked what he could do to make her stay, and Adama jokingly told him to wear long lashes, not knowing that her husband would obey like a loyal servant. Kelechi sat there broken as their voices echoed from the bedroom. His heart cracked in a way that he could not explain. Kelechi sat there all night. He did not shout or fight. He simply sat on the couch, staring at the wall as tears streamed down his face. Why is Adama doing this to me? He asked himself repeatedly as he wondered what he could have done to warrant this level of hatred from her. Kelechi had done everything that she asked. He wore the lashes and even carried a handbag in public, hoping that his wife would change her mind about leaving him, but Adama did not seem to care about his feelings. Morning came and his eyes were swollen from crying. The lashes were now gone as he sat there and watched as his wife emerged from the bedroom with a strange man. Kelechi could not control his emotions. He stood up slowly and decided to confront her. Why? He asked in a broken voice. Why are you doing this to me? Adama looked at him with irritation. Leave me alone, no, she said coldly. I didn't force you to stay. I told you this marriage was over, but you have decided to ridicule yourself instead of giving me peace. You see that marriage that you are so desperately hanging on to? It has sailed a long time ago. So the earlier you realize this and move on, the better for both of us, she said as she walked out on him, not caring what her words had done. Kelechi felt his chest tighten. In his life, he had never felt so small and humiliated. Something inside of him died in that moment as he picked up his car keys and drove to his favorite bar. Kelechi drank to stupor. He drank like a man who was trying to drown in his own thoughts. Bottle after bottle, glass after glass, until the noise in his head became louder than the music in the bar. Kelechi sat alone in a dark corner, his eyes red and swollen as people looked at him with pity. It was so obvious that he was broken. As Kelechi lifted his glass with trembling hands, someone sat beside him. He did not look up. Why are you killing yourself like this? The voice said as Kelechi turned slowly and froze. It was Nkiru, his wife's friend, whose brother worked at the bar. He saw how broken Kelechi looked and called his sister, who arrived at the bar and met Kelechi drowning in alcohol. Kelechi, why do you want to damage your organs now? She asked him as he burst out in tears, narrating all that he was going through in the hands of his wife. Nkiru, I love my wife so much, but of late, I can't place where I went wrong. happy one moment. Then the next, my wife changed into a completely different woman. She no longer calls me the sweet names that she used to. She no longer treats me like a husband, despite all that I have done to make her feel special. My wife brought another man into our house last night to spend the night in our matrimonial bed. How can she do this to me, knowing how much I love her? He cried as Nkiru tried to comfort him. She watched as Kelechi poured out his heart to her, his words tumbling out in broken sentences as his shoulders shook with quiet sobs. Nkiru listened patiently. She did not interrupt him. She did not judge him. She simply allowed him speak until his voice became hers and his tears slowed. When he was done, Nkiru took a deep breath and looked at him with pity and sadness mixed together. Kelechi, she said softly, "There is something you don't know." Kelechi lifted his head slowly, his eyes red as he looked right at her. "What is it?" he asked weakly, as Nkiru hesitated for a moment and began to speak. "Adamma is dying," she said calmly, as the words hit him like thunder. Kelechi froze for a moment as his heart began to race in fear. "What?" he whispered as Nkiru began to spill the beans. "Your wife did not sleep with any man. She's doing all this just to chase you away." "Your wife, she only has a few days to live," Nkiru continued, her voice trembling. "She found out months ago and confided in me." Adamma was so terrified of the news. She didn't know how to tell you because she knew how much you loved her. Kelechi shook his head violently. "No, that can't be true," he said, his voice cracking. "Why would she hide something like that from me now?" Nkiru wiped her tears. When Adamma was young, she watched her own mother die. She was only 12 years old. She watched how her mother's death destroyed her father, who loved his wife with all of his heart. Adamma watched as nothing excited her father anymore. His business ran down, as all he did was lock himself in the house. Her father cut off all his friends and even stopped eating at a point. Adamma watched in pain as her father became a shadow of the man that he once was. She watched his life drain one day at a time until he finally ended his life, leaving her all alone in this world. Adamma never recovered from it. She watched both of her parents die and promised herself that she would never allow the man that she loved suffer in such a way. So, when she found out that she was dying, she decided to push you away. She wanted you to hate her. She wanted you to leave. She wanted to break your love so her death would not destroy you. Kelechi broke down completely. He cried like a man who had finally lost the strength to hold on. "All this pain," he whispered, "all this humiliation, it was her way of protecting you," Nkiru said softly. "She only has a short time left," she added. "Please, you have to go home and be with her." Kelechi stood up immediately, almost losing his balance. He dropped money on the table and rushed out of the bar. He drove without caring about traffic, without caring about speed, without caring about anything as he made his way back home. Minutes later, he arrived home and met the house completely quiet. Kelechi searched around for his wife, scanning through the rooms as his heart raced in panic. "Adamma!" he called out repeatedly, but the house remained completely silent. Kelechi could feel his heart race. He searched around frantically and finally came across his wife, who was lying on the floor unconscious. Kelechi screamed her name as he rushed out to her side. She was cold, barely breathing. Terrified, he carried her into the car and drove straight to the hospital. Doctors rushed her in as they began to resuscitate her. Minutes felt like hours as the doctors worked tirelessly in the emergency room to save his wife's life. Minutes later, her vitals began to stabilize as the doctors heaved a sigh of relief. One of the nurses stepped out and called Kelechi. "Sir," she said gently, "you can see her now. But please, you have to be quiet." Kelechi nodded rapidly, his hands trembling, his clothes completely soaked in sweat. He walked into the ward with fear sitting heavy on his chest as he saw his wife Adamma lying calmly on the bed, weak, pale, her lips dry, as her eyes looked tired like that of someone who had been fighting a battle alone for a very long time. When she opened her eyes and saw Kelechi standing there, tears immediately gathered in her own eyes. "Kelechi," she whispered faintly as Kelechi rushed to her bedside and held her soft hand. His voice cracked as he began to speak. "Why?" he asked softly. Why would you do all these things to me? Adama turned her face away in shame as tears rolled down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she cried weakly. Kelechi shook his head slowly. He was angry. He was broken. But above all, he was terrified. I almost lost you, he said, his voice trembling as Adama began to cry even harder. That was what I wanted, she whispered as Kelechi froze. I wanted you to leave, she said faintly. I wanted you to hate me. Kelechi's heart tightened. You wanted me to hate you? He repeated in disbelief. Adama nodded slowly as tears began to spill freely. Yes, she said, so that when I die, you won't die with me. Kelechi felt his chest burn. He stared at her as if he could not understand the words coming out of her mouth. Adama, he whispered, you brought another man into our bed. Adama sobbed. I know, but I didn't do anything with him. I only did this just to chase you away. I know how terrible it was. I knew it would break you, and that was the whole point. You made me wear lashes like a clown, he said, his voice shaking. You humiliated me in public. You turned me into a joke. You made people mock me. Adama closed her eyes tightly, as if the guilt was now choking her. I did it so that your love would die, she said. I did it so that you would stop holding on. Kelechi held her hands tighter. Why didn't you just tell me? He asked. Why didn't you just allow me love you properly, especially at this time? Adama shook her head weakly. Because I was scared, she whispered. I watched my father die of heartbreak. I watched him crumble after my mother died. He loved her far too much. When she was gone, he could not breathe again. He stopped living, and then he died. Adama's voice broke. I didn't want that for you. I didn't want you to follow me into the grave. Kelechi began to cry, a deep cry that came from a place beyond pride, beyond anger, beyond resentment. Adama, he whispered, even if you pushed me into fire, I will still come back for you. Adama stared at him, weak and shocked. But why? She asked, her voice trembling. After everything I did to you? Kelechi wiped his tears with the back of his hand. Because love is not only sweet, he said. Love is also sacrifice. He leaned closer and kissed her forehead gently. I would rather suffer with you, he whispered, than be comfortable without you. Adama cried until her whole body shook. I'm sorry, she repeated. I'm so sorry, she said to Kelechi, who shook his head and forgave her. But promise me something. Adama looked at him weakly. What? She asked. Promise me you will stop fighting me, Kelechi said. Stop pushing me away. Let me be your husband. Let me love you properly until the end. Adama's lips trembled. She nodded slowly. I promise, she whispered. And from that day, Kelechi did not leave her side. He stopped caring about shame. He stopped caring about what people said. He only cared about his wife. He held her hand through treatment. He fed her when she could not eat. He wiped her tears when pain came at night. He prayed beside her bed until morning. And for the first time in months, Adama allowed herself to be loved. Weeks later, the entire neighborhood noticed the change. Adama no longer stood like a soldier. Her eyes were no longer cold. Kelechi no longer walked like a servant. He walked like a man carrying something precious. But the time was not on their side. One night, Adama called Kelechi closer. Her voice was faint. Kelechi, she whispered. Yes, my love, he replied, holding her hand. Adama forced a small smile. Thank you, she said, for refusing to hate me. Kelechi's eyes filled with tears. I never could, he whispered, as Adama sighed softly. And when I'm gone, she said, please don't die. Promise me that you will leave. Kelechi nodded slowly, tears filling his eyes. I promise to leave, he whispered, but I will never stop loving you. Adama smiled faintly as tears slipped down her cheeks. And that night, Adama closed her eyes and never opened them again. Kelechi cried his eyes out. Not the kind of cry that makes noise, but the kind of cry that breaks a man silently. When people heard the full story later, it broke everyone because the woman they called wicked was only trying to protect the man that she loved. The lesson to be learned from this story is that sometimes people hurt the ones they love most, not because they hate them, but because they are afraid of loss, afraid of pain, afraid of watching love turn into death. But true love does not run. It stays, endures, and even forgives. I hope you enjoy.